Life Stories Live.
Welcome to Life Stories Worldwide. Today we have a brother that's going to be sharing his life stories, and I'm so looking forward to hearing Franklin Marshall as he shares his life has been impacted. Franklin joins us up in our San Francisco chapter of Businessmen's Fellowship once a week, and it's always nice to be with brothers whose lives have been touched and impacted, like we're going to hear today. So, with that, Franklin, I don't need to be talking anymore. I'm going to screen, and I'm going to let you go ahead. So, Franklin Marshall, go right ahead. Share what God's put on your heart.
Hi, I'm Franklin Marshall, and I'm excited today to share about what God is doing in my life and has done in the past. And I grew up in a family of 13 children in Tennessee. And one of the things that I remember so vividly is that my mom would always read to us and read stories to us. And one of the stories that I remember was a story about Samuel and Eli in the Bible. But as I grew up and I went to school, I became a real introvert in school. And in the third grade, I had some issues that my mom ended up getting books and reading to me to help me through school. And in the fifth grade, as I went on to the fifth grade, the teachers said that I was having struggles in school. And that kind of continued all the way through school. And I ended up getting with the wrong groups at times and ended up getting involved in a variety of things that weren't good. I started getting involved as a teenager into drugs, selling pot. And I ended up at some point feeling that I had some things in my life that needed to be changed. I remember talking to my mom once about how I thought the world was going to come to an end in 20 years. She said that I needed to change my life if I thought the world was coming to an end in 20 years. And I went on to college. I went to Vanderbilt University and I studied classical guitar. Before I went to college, one of the things that happened to me is I remembered the story that I told my mom about how I thought the world was going to end in 20 years. So what happened, one of the things that happened to me, I became really frightened that the world was going to actually end in 20 years. What I ended up doing was I started searching myself and looking inside, trying to figure out what I needed to do if the world was going to end in 20 years. So I ended up going to the first church that I could find and just getting them to baptize me so that I could make sure that I could go to heaven if the world was going to end. So that was a revelation to me that took place in my life, and I continued on doing various things. I ended up coming to California and getting involved in doing business. I was putting on concerts and going out, getting youth involved in concerts in the community. I was a worship leader at a church. I ended up leading that music. And one of the things that I ended up doing was looking at how we could reach out to the community as I was doing the music in church to reach out to the community in reaching out to the people that were struggling in the community. The church had me to sing and become the worship leader there. I was the worship leader there. They wanted me to just stand and play guitar since I had some experience majoring in music in college. They wanted me to just stand and play guitar, but I ended up creating a series of different people doing music, 3 or 4 worship bands that rotated on Sunday mornings. And we ended up reaching out and putting on concerts in the community, getting youth involved in doing concerts. I started going out into the community, talking to businesses, trying to get them to help me to support these concerts that I was putting on for youth in the community. And it ended up that support that I was getting from businesses, putting it in my programs, it ended up turning into a newspaper. So I started this newspaper, and I did this newspaper for 10 years. And as I talked about how I struggled in school, I failed the third grade. I was having problems in the fifth grade. The teacher said that I was mentally retarded in the fifth grade, and my mom got books and started reading to me. But one of the things that happened is starting this newspaper later on in life gave me an opportunity to learn more things about reading and writing. And even though I went to school, went to college for guitar, my academic skills were not up to par. So it's amazing how this newspaper brought me into another phase of my life in focusing on reading and writing and so forth. So I did this newspaper for 10 years. It was a Christian newspaper that I did, and reaching out to the general business community. And it was amazing how this was an opportunity to reach out to the business community, the non-Christian and the Christian community. And a lot of people were involved because they wanted to support youth. And so we did this newspaper, put on concerts and events. We were able to go out with the music ministry that I was doing at church, reaching out into the community, serving homeless people. We went out to parks with musicians, young musicians, feeding homeless people. And with the newspaper, we were able to do articles, turn it eventually into a general newspaper that reached out to the general public of the community, to where we were able to have a small portion of it with Christian literature, but encompassing the whole community. Out of that grew
Life Stories.
A situation to where the United Nations, the office in the local community, asked if I could start a United Nations over in the Silicon Valley. With my newspaper background and experience, I went ahead and started a United Nations office to reach out to the community to help in initiating, bringing people together and promoting peace and some of the campaigns that the United Nations they're doing. So this was a great way of reaching out and sharing with the community and synergizing the community. This ended up growing into a point to where I ended up working with a variety of people in the city of San Francisco. This gave me an opportunity to meet a variety of people in the city of San Francisco, putting on events based on what I was doing before with the concerts with the kids that I was reaching out to. So this opened up doors to help me in a variety of ways. The newspaper business helped me academically, things that I didn't get when I was in school as a kid. I was deemed as dyslexia, but it was amazing how this all came together and how God worked in my life to bring all of these things together, where I thought I was a reject. Ultimately, this turned everything around in my life by going out to these businesses, getting them to support the concerts that I was putting on for youth in the community. And that ended up leading to the United Nations, working with them and starting a chapter and reaching out to a broader spectrum of the community. This gave me an opportunity to reach people in a variety of ways. One of the things with the newspaper that I did, I had something in to reach out and share God's love. And that was the whole idea behind the newspaper. It was a soft approach to sharing my belief as I became more involved in the Lord in my life, sharing with the community a soft sell of Christian beliefs, and this is something that continued even in the United Nations as I worked in the United Nations structure in the office, reaching out and sharing my belief and my faith with various people in the United Nations. It continued on. There was a campaign in the community. They were going to close a couple of schools in the community. I ended up writing a children's book that was related to a slave in the community that had given his property to save the only school in the community. I wrote the book, and this was an opportunity to try and help save 2 schools that they were going to close. So it ended up, we raised $6.5 million through a ballot initiative in an election to keep these schools open. But within the book that I wrote to use as a marketing tool, I was able to put in this book to show how this guy went by a church and saw people praying, and he was able to call upon God when it was opportune time and he felt depressed and he felt stressed. He could call upon God to come and help him in the times of need. And this was an example that I used to reach out and share God's love and God's faith with a larger portion of the population. When I would go in schools sometimes and I would see teachers reading this book, because they would read it as a history book, they would be reading, and I would hear them reading about how this guy, this slave, would get down and pray that God would help him. And these were just some of the ways of reaching out and sharing God's love in the community, from feeding people in the concerts that we would do. We would put concerts on in the park, and we would also take food and feed street people. When I was doing music leading in church, we had every single convalescent home in the community filled with musicians. We had someone in the jail going into the jail every week singing. We were able to put events on for kids in the community. We were able to give kids backpacks and materials for school. Before they went to school, we'd have an ice cream social. So we created a number of outreach programs that we could reach out and just share with the community, share God's love with the community. And as I had experiences, as I talk about in school, as I sold drugs, as I was involved in everything under the sun, but the selling of the drugs was the big thing in my life, that God came in and changed me and showed me how important it was to make sure I made it into heaven. When I told my mom that I thought the world was going to end in 20 years, that message resonated with me and stayed in my heart. I became so afraid that I was going to either die or I was going to somehow lose my life and not being able to make it to heaven. I went to the first church that I could find. It didn't matter what kind of church it was. I went to a church and asked them if they could baptize me, that I could give my life to God so that I wouldn't be lost, so that I wouldn't go to hell. So this was a pivotal time in my life that God spoke to me as a young child, about 10, 11 years old, that the world was going to come to an end. And all the series that took place throughout my life, was a real answer to God's calling on my life. I think I threw out a story about Eli and how Eli was telling Samuel about
Life Stories Live.
the voice that he was hearing. As Samuel went to Eli and said, I hear a voice. And the third time he said, answer, here I am. And my mom, as she read stories to us, that was one of the stories that I heard her reading to us as little kids. And I remember as a little kid standing up in the bed, my brother said, because it was 13 kids in my family, the boys were all packed in one room, about 4 or 5 boys, and then we had the girls' room, and all the girls were in the one room, and in we grew up really poor in a 4-room house on a farm, and my dad was a sharecropper, so we had outhouses and everything, and mules that we worked with. But that story about Eli and Samuel, as a young kid, I felt that God was calling me as a young kid at 4 or 5 years old. I stood up in the bed, and I told my parents that God had spoken to me and called me at that age. So when we look at the time when I told my mom that I thought the world was going to end in 20 years, and I was doing all the things that I was doing, and even went on to live a life of fun and music and rock and roll and selling drugs, I didn't have any intention of changing my life. But God spoke to me at the age of 4 or 5 through that story that my mom read, and I stood up as a little boy to accept whatever God had for me. And then God spoke to me again when I was a young kid, about 11 or 12, telling me that the world was going to come to an end. And my mom said, hey, if you think the world is going to come to an end, you need to change your life. And as I got of age, a teenager, I started fearing once I got close to 20 years. And that's when God came into my life, that changed me from drinking alcohol and smoking cigarettes and selling drugs, selling marijuana, to where I feared for my life. I feared that I was going to lose my life, either through an accident, or I was just going to die, or I was going to die and go not to heaven, but to hell. So God used these incidents in my life to change my life, that I was able to end up becoming the worship leader at a church in California. I was at Vanderbilt University and came to California. So God had a way of speaking even as a kid until I was a teenager, and speaking to me about the 20 years. And then when I became older, 18, 19 years old, is when I became a Christian. And starting the newspaper and doing the publishing that I've done recently, I've written 5 children's books. I have a cartoon character that I created, and I've reached out into the communities. I've done the United Nations. I've done a variety of events of marketing and promotion and putting on events, coaching, but understanding God's love and God's power in our lives, prayer, and how God can move in our lives, and having Him as part of our lives is so significant to be able to do and move and understand how He wants us to live our lives and to move in the right direction. Even as a non-believer, we can be successful. We can gain everything in the world, but having God in our lives give us the edge on being able to move and understand the direction that we need to go in order to be in the right flow of things, that our lives can be perfect with Him. And I am excited about a variety of things that God is doing in my life right now, the fullness that God brings. And I think that's one of the things that's so important to understand, that God brings fullness in our life. I mean, as I said, we can be successful as non-Christians, as not having God as part of our lives. But when we get God, the Holy Spirit, Jesus, to come and indwell into our lives, it gives us an edge on direction. It gives us an edge on sensitivity to live a whole life, to understand that God love is so powerful to give us directions that can help us with everything that we are in need of. When I look at our environment, how a lot of the hospitals that have been started by Christians, how a lot of movements have been started, universities started by Christian movements, and just on and on and on. And we see the goodness of the Lord in our lives as we give our lives to Him, as we accept Him, and we want to do things that are right. So that was one of the things that happened with me, the Holy Spirit coming and indwelling me into my life, in my marriage, and wanting to bring my children up in the right way and teach them and train them and get them involved in being successful. That's one of the things that I came up with, this book, the little book that I came up with on personal development. That was the Lord giving it to me on the line upon line, precept upon precept, on how to manage living our lives. Faith without works is dead. Giving some principles on how to raise children, how to manage our finances,